identified helping them here.
Well, that's the thing. They did have help in this country. If you're looking at it from the Saudi Arabia angle, the Saudi embassy helped them. It was just within the last couple of months, a name was leaked by the FBI of someone who worked at the embassy who supported two of the alleged hijackers in San Diego, Khalid Almidar and Nawaf al-Hazmi. And he has ties. He took answers or direction from Bandar, who his wife was financially connected to two of the hijackers, and Bandar himself gave money to one of the individuals associated with the hijackers in a suitcase full of money. I think it was $10,000 or something.
Wait, explain who Bandar is, because he's often called Bandar Bush. Yeah.
Right. Prince Bandar was the ambassador from Saudi Arabia to the United States from the early 80s until, mid-2000s. And now his daughter is, by the way. But he was involved in the Iran-Contra affair. I mean, he threatened, I believe he threatened Britain with terrorist attacks if they continued to investigate the BAE scandal that he was involved in, which had to do with weapons and stuff like that. During the Syria war, when that first started, he was one of the people responsible for sending terrorists into Syria to try and take out, Assad and everyone, the quote-unquote moderate rebels, if you remember that.
So here you got a guy, Bandar, named Bandar Bush, Prince Bandar, so closely associated with the Bush family. And you're telling me that it's documented that he gave money to the hijackers?
His wife gave money that found its way to the hijackers. But he gave somebody money directly. Omar Basman, I believe was his name, who was an associate of the hijacker. So I don't remember the full story. I mean, we're talking 20 years now, but that's
and the thing is, too, it's not just one story. This is over and over and over and over again. And we could bring up little examples.
There's so many aspects to this story. Like NORAD, I did an interview. It took me 2.5, almost 3 hours just to do that one interview about NORAD. The insider trading that was taking place prior to 9/11. That was barely investigated, and the SEC was found.
I have that in my notes about the insider trading. I was going to ask you that, but let's start first with NORAD. What are the issues with NORAD?
Oh, let's see. They gave 3 different timelines with regard to their response on the day of 9/11. Senator Mark Dayton questioned 9/11 Commission Chair Tom Keene and Vice Chair Lee Hamilton about NORAD's false statements to the people in their commission, and they also spoke to Zelikow. Mark Dayton questioned 4 individuals, and I have a tape. My YouTube channel is Gold9472. If you just do a search for Mark Dayton, he questioned about 4 individuals about their response and their lies that day. One of them was Donald Rumsfeld, Philip Zelikow, Richard Myers, who was in charge of NORAD. Let's see. On June 17th, 2004, 9/11 Commissioner Jamie Gorelick asked General Myers about NORAD's mission. Quote, in my experience, the military is very clear about its charters and who is supposed to do what. So if you go back and you look at the foundational documents for NORAD, they do not say defend us only against the threat coming in from across the ocean or across our borders. It has 2 missions, and one of them is to control the airspace above the domestic United States, and aerospace control is defined as providing surveillance and control of the airspace of Canada and the United States. To me, that air sovereignty concept means that you have a role which, if you are postured only externally, you defined out of the job. She also went on to say, I would like to know, as the second question, is it your job? And if not, whose job is it to make current assessments of the threat and decide whether you are positioned correctly to carry out a mission, which at least on paper, NORAD had. At the end of the exchange, General Myers asked, quote, did I answer both questions? And Jamie Gorelick responds, yes and no, and my time has expired. Basically, NORAD was saying that their responsibility after 9/11, they were saying after 9/11 that their responsibility was to only cover threats coming from outside the United States, as if the airspace around the continental United States is a magic place where nothing ever happens in the air.
But let me ask you this, John. Isn't that a lot of 20/20 hindsight? Like, can't we give them the benefit of the doubt that on that morning, this had never happened before, that, okay, it's a plane. Oh, really? Go ahead.
It did happen.
Go ahead.
Back in the early 70s, there were 4 planes that were hijacked. And I just added this entry to historycommons.org. But they're called the Dawson's Field hijacking. Let's see. I'll try to find something on it really quickly. It wasn't all on the same day, but it was very close. So let's see. Terrorists tried to simultaneously hijack 3 airliners heading to the United States from Europe in a series of events that culminate into 2 of the airliners, along with another plane being blown up at the airfield in Jordan. The hijackers are members of a group called the Popular Front of Liberation of Palestine, so on and so forth. Let's see. There was a quote in here that I want to read to you. Okay, the series of events will become known as Black September. Until 9/11, September 6, 1970, when the first hijackings occur, will be known as the blackest day in aviation history. The events will lead the international aviation community to finally take coordinated action to prevent hijacking. Additionally, they are, quote, the first major terrorist hijacking attempt that captured the media's attention. And Mary Chavo, Inspector General of the Department of Transportation from 1990 to 1996, will later note the similarities between Black September hijackings and the events of September 11, 2001. When she criticizes the failure of authorities to prevent the 9/11 attacks, while the events of September 11 were astonishing in the numbers of casualties and the enormity of the devastation, she will comment, quote, the modus operandi of the terrorists was not new. Almost 31 years after 4 planes were hijacked and blown up in an Islamic Jihad stage in Jordan, 4 U.S. planes were hijacked in what Osama bin Laden would call, in a congratulatory message, the Jihad.
Right, but John, well, once again, giving you the benefit of the doubt, okay, is that I'm familiar with Black September, and they did capture 4 planes. They landed them in the Middle East, and they blew them up over there on the ground. This is the first time, though, that commercial airliners were used as missiles, into buildings and stuff. So, we can kind of, and they had kind of said, okay, if there's a hijacking, everybody just sit in your seats and wait and go to the destination, and then we'll just take care of it from there. So there was like a new policy of how to deal with hijackings
But it's not like they didn't prepare for such things. That there were protocols and all kinds of things that weren't followed on 9/11 for some reason. And I recommend you go listen to my interview with Malcolm Chaddock about NORAD, because I get all into that stuff. Yes, there were protocols. They would prepare. They would have war games and stuff like the military exercises to practice for such contingencies. So you can't really say that.
Okay. Now, what about, we're talking about the hijackers had help, and they had financing, you mentioned, from Bandar Bush.
Right.
What about the financing that came from Pakistan?
Well, Lieutenant General Mahmoud Ahmed, who was the head of the Pakistani ISI at the time of the 9/11 attacks, ordered Ahmed Omar Saeed Sheikh to wire transfer $100,000 to Mohammed Atta. And it's very hard to absolutely confirm that it did happen, but there's more reason to think it did happen than not. And I'm trying to find it right now, if you don't mind. All right. Deputy Assistant Director of the FBI's Counterterrorism Division, John S. Pistoli, stated that their investigation, quote, has traced the origin of the funding of 9/11 back to financial accounts in Pakistan, where high-ranking and well-known al-Qaeda operatives played a major role in moving the money forward, eventually into the hands of the hijackers located in the U.S. In January 2002, during a visit to India, FBI Director Robert Mueller was told about Saeed Sheikh's involvement in the 9/11 attacks by Indian investigators. Apparently, quote, on the eve of the publication of its report, the 9/11 Commission was given a stunning document from Pakistan claiming that the Pakistani intelligence officers knew in advance of the 9/11 attacks. On March 3rd, 2006, the Friday Times reported that, quote, Pakistan gave tens of thousands of dollars through its lobbyists in the United States to members of the 9/11 Inquiry Commission to convince them to drop some anti-Pakistan findings in the report. This, according to FO official Sadiq. According to the Pakistan paper Daily Times, this story about bribery, quote, triggered U.S. media interest. And I said, I don't remember seeing any mention of this story at all. So if you see the media tackling it, let me know. On April 10th, 2006, Pakistan officially denied the allegations of bribery, even though many countries, spend money here, lobbying. Okay, here's another one. On October 1st, 2001, a little less than a month after 9/11, Lieutenant General Mahmoud Ahmed and Saeed Sheikh may have been involved in another terrorist attack together. So again, there's a connection there between the two of them. It's more reason to think it did happen than not. Now, Ahmed Omar Saeed Sheikh is now, I believe, currently in prison, and there has been recent talk about them releasing him because it was found that he actually did not murder Daniel Pearl, who was the Wall Street Journal reporter that was kidnapped way back in 2001 and murdered. Do you remember?
Yeah, I remember, yeah.
At first, they said it was Ahmed Omar Saeed Sheikh that murdered him, but they found out later that it was Khalid Sheikh Mohammed that murdered him. But I think it was Ahmed Sheikh or Omar Sheikh that helped to hijack or kidnap him.
Well, wasn't there something too about an ISI official visiting Washington, D.C. The day before?
That's Lieutenant General Mahmoud Ahmed, the guy who ordered Ahmed Omar Saeed Sheikh to wire transfer $100,000 to Mohammed Atta. First off, he met with people, I believe George Tenet and others in the months before 9/11 in Pakistan. He met with Porter Goss, Bob Graham, and someone else, I believe, in the weeks before 9/11. And then during the week of 9/11, on the day of 9/11, he was in D.C. talking to people. So somebody who was supposedly involved with 9/11 was in D.C. talking with people, and he was allowed out of the country. So who knows?
Many people were allowed out of the country, weren't there? Not just people always talk about the Saudi Arabians who were allowed to hop on their planes and leave, but there were other actual suspects that were allowed to leave.
Other suspects that were allowed. Well, okay, there was somebody. Okay, there was an incident after 9/11 where Saudi flights were allowed to leave the country.
Right.
People, related to the Bin Ladens and others, and one of them, and they said at the time that no terrorists, quote unquote terrorists, were allowed to leave the country. But one of them was somebody by the name of Khalil Bin Laden, who was the brother of Osama Bin Laden. It was wanted in Brazil for terrorist activities, I believe, and he was one of the people allowed to leave. That didn't have to do with 9/11, but I don't know which suspects you're referring to.
Well, in the documentary, it said something about 800 people were suspects and were allowed to leave, and none of them were charged.
Yeah, after 9/11, they went through all these arrests of people, Muslim this, Muslim that, everybody. It was just horrible. People who had nothing to do with terrorism were being arrested. And, a lot of them were eventually allowed to leave, I believe, or were freed, I believe. So,
okay, let's take a little commercial break. We're here today with John Gold. You can find his website. It's called We Were Lied To About 911.com, and there's a book by the same name, We Were Lied To About 911, The Interviews. He's the financier behind two documentary films. One is 9/11 Press for Truth.
One of the financiers.
Okay, one of the financiers. In their own words, the untold stories of 9/11. We'll be right back with more of John Gold after these messages. And by the way, to his YouTube page is Gold9472. You can go there and search his YouTube channel there and catch all his other material he's put up. John, in the documentary, there was an episode in there about one of the hijackers was living with an FBI informant.
Yeah, that was Abdusattar Sheikh. There's a lot of confusion about his story. He was interviewed, the Bush administration blocked him from testifying before the Joint Congressional Inquiry. I do believe he spoke with the 9/11 Commission. There's something called memoranda for the record. These are documents that are essentially handwritten notes about what happened during different interviews. And his was classified, I believe, for a long time, and then I think it was released or leaked. I don't remember. I wish I remembered everything about him. But yeah, he was supposedly an FBI informant and had the two hijackers, or I think, were living in the same building as him, or same apartment complex, or same house as him, I forget. And that was it. And Stephen Butler, I think it was his handler at the time, said that if they had brought him in, maybe they might have been able to figure out the attacks or something to that effect.
Yeah, I think he said, no, that's okay. He said something like it would have been a full court press. If we
Yes,
would have,
thank you.
if we would have known. No, let me tell you something. The documentary is really heavy, weighing on my mind today after watching this. I really